On Monday, a Chinese submarine test-fired a ballistic missile in the Pacific, sending a message about the nation's nuclear capabilities, just hours after Australia signed a mutual defence pact with Fiji. Pacific leaders were quick to criticise the move, and the Philippines called it a reckless display of military power. I spoke to Professor Victor Gao, the Vice President of the Centre for China and Globalisation, earlier today from Beijing. Victor Gao, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you very much for having me.
What was the purpose of China firing a nuclear-capable long-range ballistic missile deep into the Pacific Ocean?
Well, China is one of the biggest nuclear powers in the world of today. No one should second guess about China's military capabilities. And for China to launch such a testing fire is very routine and very normal. No country should pretend to be surprised about that.
Well, when you say routine, that's not strictly true, is it? Because the last test was in September 2024, and for this kind of missile prior to that in the 1980s. So that's not routine, is it?
I think it is routine. I think not long ago, China tested a land-based missile, which dropped into the ocean to the east of the French Polynesian. And this time it is more or less in the same line. And it dropped way off the coast from Australia, So I think Australia should have no reason to be surprised about that. And Australia should also not pretend to know about the Chinese military capabilities. In my best judgment, China is completely on the par with the United States in terms of conventional weapons and nuclear weapons. And China and the United States want to maintain peace between these two most consequential countries, and no other country should agitate for war or showdown between themselves and China. We should really promote inevitability of peace in the world of today.
Just to understand what you're saying about China's intentions, we understand China currently has about 600 nuclear warheads. Is it China's intention to build as many nuclear warheads as the United States, to be on par with the United States?
You never know how many nuclear warheads China has, and this is the biggest strategic ambiguity in our times. No one should know about that. Last year, in a very important meeting, I made a point. No country should ever imagine imposing a nuclear war on China, because while China will not tell you how many nuclear warheads China has, China will have enough nuclear warheads to annihilate the country which dares to impose a nuclear war on China. This is the strategic certainty and the assurance in our time. Therefore, get along with China in peace. Don't agitate for war with China, and don't pretend that China is not a mighty military power in the world of today, dedicated for peace, dedicated to defend free trade.
You talked about the fact that Australia shouldn't be surprised by this test, and yet the Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong made it clear that the warning of this test was extremely short, so they were surprised. Do you accept what she says, that a test of this nature with very limited warning is destabilising for the region?
No, not at all. I think China follows international protocol in notifying countries of concern for this testing. And I think Australia should be grateful that China give Australia the courtesy of advance notice about the testing, about the flight details, etc. And I hope China and Australia will really get along with each other, not only as two very large economic trading partners, but also more and more sharing and coordinating on political matters or even geopolitical matters.
Let me ask you about the timing of the test. Australia and Fiji had just signed a new defence alliance, one of a number of treaties signed by Australia designed to push back against China's influence in the Pacific. Was this test timed to coincide with the signing of that agreement?
Personally, absolutely not. The testing, as far as I understand, started on July the 6th, one day before the anniversary of what we call July the 7th incident, marking the Japanese full-scale aggression of China on September the 7th, back in the 1930s. This is the main reason, in my best judgment, of why this testing started on July the 6th, one day before this very important anniversary.
Let me just ask you this, if I may. How much do you think that this test of a nuclear-capable missile landing in the Pacific will set back China's diplomacy in the Pacific?
Absolutely not. I think China and Pacific countries, especially the island countries, get along with each other very well. We respect each other. We deal with each other.
And yet the leaders of the Pacific nations made clear that they objected to China testing a missile of this nature in the Pacific.
Well, in the world of today, in terms of practicality, you may object, but then you need to follow the international rules. The Pacific is not a prohibited region for nuclear testing, and China has absolute legitimacy in doing this kind of testing in the Pacific without violating any international protocol. This is the end of the story, period, and this should not be a hindrance to China-Pacific cooperation. China is a force for international peace. By testing its nuclear capability, China will deter war of all kinds, including nuclear war being imposed on China.
If China was sincere about this being part of China's efforts to bring peace to the world, it would seek to re-engage in international negotiations on nuclear non-proliferation, wouldn't it?
Well, China wants to enter into nuclear renegotiation on the condition that the United States and Russia will agree not to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon countries, against nuclear-free zones, and not being the first country to use nuclear weapons. On that basis, I think China will be perfectly happy to enter into negotiation of any kind with Russia or the United States or both of them, but not on these conditions. China will not enter into negotiations.
Do you expect that we will see further testing of long-range missiles, including airborne long-range missile testing? Is that what we'll see next?
Well, China has already declared to the world its nuclear launch capabilities can touch any corner in any part of the world within 20 minutes or so. So no country should be surprised if China will do such testing in any corner of the world if China decides to do so. And no country should be an obstacle to China's testing like this. And I hope every country in the world, including Australia, should be very happy to see that China's declared nuclear policy is not to use nuclear weapon against any non-nuclear weapon country, against a nuclear-free zone, and China will never use nuclear weapon the first ahead of any other country against other countries. And China will never allow any nuclear power to impose a nuclear war on China without having that country annihilated by the Chinese nuclear capabilities.
These don't sound like terribly peaceful words, but let me just ask you one question. Does Australia's increasing interoperability, that is working alongside with enabling US forces in Australia, make Australia a target for the Chinese military?
Well, at the time when AUKUS was announced, I said publicly on Australian television that Australia should really treasure the luxury of being a nuclear-free country. So my point is very simple. Treasure the nuclear-free zone, free country status for Australia, and make sure that Australia will not be involved in any nuclear confrontation. And a nuclear-powered submarine will be tantamount to be a nuclear submarine in itself, and is a major step into enriching nuclear uranium, etc., and possessing nuclear technologies to be less and less considered as a nuclear-free country. And I want to urge everyone in Australia to do the right thing. Stay away from being a nuclear power, because you do not know what will be the consequence. Thank you.
Victor Gao, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.